All right, well, I'll get started. So, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us today for our Staying Intentional in 2022 workshop that's being hosted by the Department of University Advancement's Alumni Mentors Program. Just a few notes and acknowledgements before we get started this afternoon. So today's webinar is being recorded and it is going to be shared with all those that registered on behalf of those that can't join us today or have to hop off early. And over the next hour, we will be chatting over 3 modules with Chris, and they'll be presented with a mini Q&A following each theme. And we will also have a short breakout room to begin. I know everyone's favorite thing at the beginning. So if you do have any questions you'd like Chris to explore, we'd welcome you to either type them into the chat box, which I'll be monitoring, or you can also send them to me directly if you'd like to keep it a bit more private. Your questions that you do put into the chat box will be visible by other participants, so we do hope that this sparks some ideas. Our Alumni Mentors Program would not be possible without the support of the hundreds of Carleton alumni that volunteer each year to support our Carleton students and recent graduates. And I'm always happy to acknowledge and thank them for their commitment and support. I also want to shine a light on the amazing group of mentees that we have this year who have brought such kindness and enthusiasm to the program. It's always wonderful to hear of their successes throughout the mentorship. Throughout the academic year, so we are halfway through it, but throughout this academic year, in addition to our mentorship pairings, the Alumni Mentors Program also hosts a variety of workshops that focus on goal setting, professional development, and practical life skills, which is why I'm thrilled that we can share the wonderfulness today that is alumnus and mentor Chris Bailey.
Wow.
Which you've heard from already. But over the last decade, for those of you, just to talk you up, Chris.
Yeah. Keep going, please. It's great.
My pleasure. Over the last decade, Chris has personally experimented with pretty much every productivity tactic under the sun, from living in total isolation for 10 days. And this was pre-pandemic.
Pre-COVID, yeah. It's not impressive anymore. Yeah.
No, well, now most of us can, I think most of us can do it, but before all of that, you also stopped using your smartphone except for an hour a day. And also he worked for 90-hour work weeks. And that's just a few of the things. His passion for productivity began after graduating from Carleton's Sprott School of Business. And that is when he decided to decline his job offers and instead dedicate a year of his life exploring his interests. Since then, he has written 2 best-selling books that have been published globally in 20 languages. Chris has spoken in front of tens of thousands of people around the world on how they can be more productive without hating the process. And he has written hundreds of articles on the topic. Chris's latest TED Talk, How to Get Your Brain to Focus, has even surpassed over 10 million views on YouTube. In his spare time, which I'm surprised he has spare time, Chris has launched an Audible original, How to Train Your Mind, which is an exploration of the practical and tactical benefits of a meditation practice. And he is currently writing his 3rd book on how calm helps our productivity. Along with his wife, Arden, Chris is the host of a successful podcast, Time and Attention. And this year, Chris has taken on a critical role in our Carleton community by taking on his 2nd mentee, who is a recent graduate that has their own writing aspirations. And somehow, Chris has had the time to also write a column for alifeofproductivity.com. In a recent interview with TED Talks, Chris was told that he might be the most productive man you've ever hoped to meet. And after today's presentation, I'm sure you'll see why. I know I myself am looking forward to learning from this wonderful productivity expert. So please join me in welcoming to the virtual floor, Chris Bailey.
Thank you, Tristan. I wish that intro could go on forever. Honestly,
I can keep going if you'd like.
Yeah. Do you have more? I don't know. That's great. No, it's so nice to be with you all today, fellow mentors, mentees, Carleton people. My wife is a Carleton person. I'm a Carleton person. We are all Carleton people, I suppose. Thank you so much for coming. I know there's a lot going on right now, especially in the city of Ottawa, that is often tough to look away from. So I really, really appreciate you being here for Staying Intentional in 2022, which at least I think is the current year. I don't know. With all this isolation time, it's sometimes tough to keep track. But I study the topic of personal productivity for a living. And one of the interesting aspects of studying this particular topic is the images that this topic calls to mind for different people. Because I think what a lot of people, something that I've learned about this topic, when they hear the word productivity, they think of something that is so cold and corporate and all about efficiency and effectiveness, whatever those terms actually mean. One meme that I recently encountered that I think summarizes this quite well is this. It's the haha business meme. You can view this meme at any time at your leisure. If you go to the website www.haha.business, I would encourage you to do so if you want this reminder of what people think about when they hear the word productivity, I guess. It's also a great meme to share just in your time as well. But the way that I choose to define productivity, you know, I've filtered through a bunch of different definitions of this term, but the way that I like to frame it is accomplishing what we intend to do. It's simple, right? We are perfectly productive when we accomplish the things that we set out to do in the first place. And this is true regardless of the kind of day we want to have. If you want to, hire somebody new onto your team or get a job and write 2,000 words and then clear out your email inbox, and then you do, I would argue that you're perfectly productive. And the same is true if you intend to have a relaxing day on a beach somewhere, which sounds lovely right about now, maybe with 2 pina coladas, one for each hand, as that song goes. If you set out to do something of that nature and then you do it, I would argue that you're perfectly productive. And so in framing a session on productivity, on intention for this year of 2022, at least I think, this is actually a great definition to work with. It's not about how busy we are. It's not about how much we produce. It's not about how much stuff we answer. It's about the intentions we set and whether or not we follow through with them. And in exploring this subject of productivity, there's essentially 3 main areas that I look at in terms of finding ideas that are worth sharing with people like you. The first and foremost, which I personally believe is the most important area of the 3, is the academic research, right? If you're, sharing advice that isn't rooted in science, are you really sharing good advice? The best advice fits with the way that we're wired. It fits with the way that we think and the way that we act. So that's the first and foremost area that I like to look at. The second is interviews. I don't like just kind of like putting my head in a bunch of research studies, though that is an odd obsession that I've gotten into over the years. I love talking to the greats, the gurus, the masterminds of productivity, so that I can separate out the advice that works from the stuff that doesn't. Because I don't know if you've encountered a lot of productivity advice in your day, but there's a lot of fluff out there to wade through. A lot of things that sound good on the surface, a lot of 5-10 step trademarked, all rights reserved solutions for becoming more productive. But I think we have to separate what works from what doesn't, make back the time we spend on productivity so that we can move things forward. The third area is experiments. Tristan mentioned a few of them in that wonderful introduction that I wish could have gone on for the rest of time so that my ego could overtake everything that I do. But essentially, I love conducting experiments where I push on the boundaries of what I'm able to accomplish both mentally and physically. There have been dozens of these experiments. I won't go into them all because I want to get tactical as soon as possible here. But a couple of them that I'll share, measuring energy fluctuations throughout the day and trying every to-do list strategy underneath the sun. And I'll share my favorite of those with you today. So that is a Cole's Notes, a Cliff's Notes. I always forget, one of those is American and the other one is Canadian. Cole's Notes and Cliff's Notes. No, Cole's Notes, because of Cole's, the book chain. That's a Cole's Notes summary of my approach to the subject of productivity. And as Tristan was saying, this is kind of the approach that I take to all the work that I do. You know, the books that she was mentioning, which I promise this is the only self-promotional slide of the entire presentation. And more importantly, far more importantly, this is the foundation for the ideas that I'm going to be sharing with you today. All right. Whirlwind of an introduction. Check. I have a quick question for you though. You know, if we're chatting about intention over the next hour or so, we're going to have a breakout room. It'll come about halfway through the session today, but I do have a quick question for you. If you wouldn't mind throwing an answer in the chat or two. And that question is, what is it that gets in the way of what you intend to accomplish? Just to kind of get a feel for the lay in the land. Truckers aside, convoy aside, you know, what is your biggest source of distraction right now? And I will try to open up the chat. Feel free to have at it. Emails, Twitter, pets. Oh, pets are a wonderful distraction. I wish, well, we have a turtle in the other room. She doesn't come out and play and kind of interrupt. Social media, Discord. Yeah, I'm only on one Discord. I feel I need stress probably. Yeah. Everybody, multiple competing objectives. Stress is something that we will definitely cover today. The time allotting is often too short. Yeah, this is one of the wonders of productivity. We have more to do than we have time to do it in. So if we can prioritize properly, we can get the head of things. Teams, work commitments, social media, another check for social media, deadlines for certain tasks. Oh, they're flooding in. Living in a body that needs to eat. Jacqueline, need to introduce you to Soylent. It's fantastic. Just like some liquid that has all of your body needs, carbs. It's also very unhealthy, I think. Wanting to go outside, yes, and in quiet, I would imagine too. I'm just bouncing around here. Too much deadlines for different tasks, too much work, can't decide priority. We're going to dig deep into prioritization soon. Stress and family commitments, yes. Wanting to go, yeah. System imposed parameters like calendar blocks set for each hour of the day. And we all have our own productivity system that can introduce constraints, but also introduce more, freedom in some way, hopefully, and different values. Yes. These are all fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for sharing, for participating in that chat question. Over the course of the next hour or so, I guess 40 minutes or so, I'm going to share hopefully some practical, tactical ways to overcome this distraction, to focus more deeply, and to choose what to focus on in the first place. So thank you, everybody, for sharing. I don't know that there are many of those that we won't touch on over the course of the session. So I'm excited to jump in. All right. Let's start with my all-time favorite prioritization strategy that I want to share with you, called the Rule of 3. All right. Productivity advice is great. But here's the thing about it. For every minute you spend reading about productivity or listening to some fella like me talk about productivity, you have to make that time back and then some, right? Because the subject is productivity. And sure enough, there is a lot of advice to filter through as it relates to daily prioritization. One of the challenges for intentionality that not only came up in the chat, but comes up every single day, every week and throughout the year. And sure enough, if you dig into this productivity space, you will see that examples of strategies for prioritization abound, right? But not all these pay for themselves. Some of them, you're kind of rearranging the deck chairs on a ship that won't move direction. I'm not going to say it's the Titanic, but it's a ship that won't move direction. And sure enough, there are countless of these strategies out there for managing the things that we have to get done every day. Getting things done is one that comes to mind. You know, this wonderful system that says that our mind is for having ideas, not for holding them. Personal Kanban, where we track the different stages of projects. We can try keeping sticky notes everywhere. We can download it hundreds of different applications. Sure enough, I did most of this stuff, actually, all the things on this list and more. But what I found was that none of these systems, none of these strategies actually made me care about what I had to get done each and every day. But luckily, I then encountered one ritual that instantly stuck with the habits that I have that I think will stick for you as well. And that ritual is called the Rule of Three, the best one that I have found. Now, there is something marvelous about the way in which our brain is wired, where we're wired to think in threes. And, you know, speaking of the science of productivity, this is perhaps why this ritual, why this rule has stuck. There is a natural limit of our working memory in our mind that limits us to think about only three things at one time. We used to think we can hold 7 or 8 unique chunks of information in our mind, but the latest research shows that it's around 3. And you can see that examples of this abound, especially when we look to popular culture, right? We have sayings like, good things come in threes, and celebrities die in threes, and the third time's the charm, and the good, the bad, the ugly, and blood, sweat, and tears, and location, 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 right? We group things together into threes naturally. Even a story, right? A sequence of hundreds, thousands of things, if you read any Neil Stephenson books, as I do, that happen one after the next, we divide into 3 parts, right? The beginning, the middle, and the end. The pinnacle of human athletic achievement. Going on right now. We award 3 medals, gold, silver, and bronze in the Olympics. And even growing up, we're immersed in stories that involve threes. The 3 little bears, the 3 blind mice, the 3 little pigs, the 3 musketeers, the list goes on. That's why the rule works so well. And I'll finally share the rule with you now. At the start of each day, you fast forward to the end of the day in your head and you ask yourself, by the time that this day is done, what 3 main things will I want to have accomplished? Right? By the time this day is done, what 3 main things will I want to have accomplished? And if you love the rule, if you find that it sticks as I think you will, you might be tempted to do the same every week and every year as well. And the beautiful thing, if you have, you know, a time blocking strategy for organizing the things that you have to get done, it works in conjunction with whatever system you use already. You know, if you did only 3 things all day, you probably wouldn't have a job after much of a period of time. We have the minutia to keep up with that we can capture on other methods. But these 3 things are the most critical. They're the most important. They are the most essential. So it's always easiest to illustrate this stuff with an example. My 3 intentions today: number 1, run a fun, hopefully helpful session for my mentor friends. Number 2, write 1,000 words of a book that I'm in the middle of. And number 3, clear out email inboxes. So that is the rule of 3. Simple strategy to kick us off today, but one that I think is very, very essential, especially when we have so much noise that surrounds us throughout the day. All right. So I promised a bit of a tactical workshop. And sure enough, we are going to get tactical right now. So if you have a pen and a sheet of paper, I would encourage you to take that out now. And I am going to set a little timer for you for 90 seconds, 1 minute and 30 seconds. And here's the challenge. In 90 seconds, I want you to write down your 3 work or school intentions / goals for 2022. This is a deadline of 90 seconds. Capture the first things that come to your mind. I'm not going to give you like 15 minutes, but the idea is, because that's like phoning in this session. For me, we got other stuff to get to, but I'm going to set a timer. Carve out your personal intentions if you have a second too. I'm going to play some beautiful, reflective, non-copyrighted music, and go. "45 seconds, everybody." Ba, 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 ba. 10 seconds left. Do, 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 do. And time. All right. I hope nobody nodded off, because there is a little reflection activity or a breakout activity after the next module, which we'll dig into a bit more deeply in a second. But hopefully getting started worked well for you. Quick question. Do you have any questions at this point? We're just kind of kicking off. And Tristan, if you wouldn't mind, if there are questions that have come in the chat directly, we can kind of cross them off the list as we go instead of all at the end.
I have gotten one sent to me. So for the rule of 3, does this limit work with other areas of our life beyond prioritizing what we have to get done?
Does this limit work with other areas? Yeah, one incredible place that this works is in communication. So, if you're communicating with a group of people, they probably won't want to listen to a whole laundry list of things, but they're probably willing to remember and internalize 3 things. So it works in writing, it works in communication, it works in debate, it works in making a point. And that's why I think it works so well in practice. It's a way of communicating priorities to ourselves. Yeah, good
Great.
question.
And we have another one. Do you recommend having long-term rule of 3 rules, so like yearly ones, but in different aspects of your life? So one for career, one for personal. Yeah,
another good question. So I personally set 3 priorities for work and personal each and every day, because in that way you can decide just how balanced you wish to be. There are some days where it's the weekend and you don't want to accomplish 3 things for work. I see in the chat, Andrew mentioned, am I setting the bar too low, just trying to get one thing done? No, absolutely not. And some days, productivity is often a process of understanding the constraints that we have. If you're at a conference all day, if you're in Zoom meetings all day, which sounds just completely draining and exhausting, you'll probably have a bit less energy for other things and a bit less time for other things too. And one thing is perfect, but I personally set daily goals for personal and for work, and weekly goals for work and yearly goals for personal and work. So I don't set those weekly personal goals, but that's what works for me, at least.
Wonderful. And we have one more question.
Yeah.
How to define getting something done? Do you break it up into segments?
Yeah. Generally, the more ambiguous a task is, the more specific it's worth being in that rule of three. So defining when, where, and under what circumstances you're going to get something done with ambiguous work doubles or triples your odds of actually following through with something. So do keep that in mind. If like one of your things is eat a pizza, you don't need to be that specific because it's not ambiguous. It's fun. But if it's not as fun, definitely be specific. Cool.
Great. Thank
you.
Good
stuff. All right, little mini Q&A, rapid fire. Now let's dig in to a topic. Thank you, Tristan, for the help there. It's tough with the chat, with going back and forth, so I appreciate that. Now that we've defined those intentions, or at least have started to do so, it's now time to talk about the subject of distraction. Now, this is an area that is near and dear to me. I love the science of distraction. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to pore over pretty much all of the prevailing research surrounding the topic of why and how, the mechanisms through which we get distracted. Poring over all the research out there, accumulating a bunch of research notes that eventually turned into a book. And now it is time for that book report. I will share a few of the most valuable lessons from that foray into the research with you. One of the most surprising discoveries from this particular endeavor was just how long we focus on one thing for before we get distracted, before we switch to doing something else. One bit of research, the most reliable one that I have found, suggests, is from Gloria Marks. She's a researcher at Microsoft, of all places. Her research was the most sound methodology that I could encounter. She found that when we're doing work in front of our computer, especially when our phone is nearby, this distraction rectangle, which we'll talk about in a second, on average, we work on one thing for just 40 seconds before we switch to doing something else. And Jacqueline, who I know is here, sorry to call you up, but we were chatting the other day, of watching people read a book on the train. And it's baffling to see, because about every 40 seconds or so, somebody will go from the phone to their book, to the phone to the book, to the phone to the book every 40 seconds or so. And it's this cycle of distraction that is very misunderstood, in my opinion, because the problem isn't what we think it is. We think the problem is that our brains are distracted. This is definitely a problem, and it's something that we need to work to overcome. But there's a deeper problem than this. Like, sure, our brains are distracted. No doubt about it. But the deeper problem is that our brains actually crave distraction in the first place. More than this, though, they reward us for seeking out and then finding distraction, right? But with a hit of dopamine, that chemical in our mind that is correlated with the anticipation of pleasure, right? So we go to the book, miss out on a bit of dopamine. We pick up our phone, though, we get another hit of dopamine. We bounce to Instagram, we get a hit. We bounce to email, we get a hit of dopamine. We check to text, we get a hit of. We check who slid into our direct message. We get a hit of dopamine with each one of these distractions. In other words, our brain rewards us on a chemical level for locating a distraction. This is why we find them so difficult in the moment. We have to deal with them ahead of time. So how can we better think about the distractions that we face in our day in a pragmatic way that allows us to get past that 40-second mark, to lower how stimulated our mind is just a little bit? One of the best ways that I've found of breaking down the distractions that we face is by thinking about the distractions that we face on 2 criteria, so that we can clear a lot of the brush out of the way, a lot of that layer of unnecessary busyness that has entered into our life with the advent of the smartphone. Right? We can think about the distractions and interruptions that we face on 2 different criteria. I'd highly encourage, there won't be time in this session, but if you're looking to understand the things that trip you up throughout the day, that keep your mind stimulated, this is a wonderful way of breaking things down. Get a sheet of paper, divide it into a box with 2 by 2 grids, and divide it up based on 2 different criteria. The first is whether or not you have control over something arising, right? Because this will dictate how we respond to the different distractions that we face. If we can control something from coming up, oh baby, that now we're in business. We can tame that and then clear that brush out of the way and then get back to focusing. The second criteria is whether something is annoying, so it's unwelcome, or whether it's fun to engage with, and so we're drawn to it. Every single distraction that we face fits into one of these 4 boxes, whether we have or don't have control, whether it's annoying or fun. So annoying ones we can't control: in-person interruptions, unavoidable meetings, pets coming in, wanting our attention throughout. That's a fun one. That's a fun one that we can't control. Zoom lunches, calls from friends that come in, pets that come wandering in through the door when we're doing a talk. Turtles don't do that. I wish they did. Because we can't control these things from coming up, we have to control how we relate to them after they do, dealing with them, getting back on track, or enjoying the ones that are fun that we don't have control over, all while keeping our original intention in mind. But luckily, thank God, actually, most of the distractions and interruptions we face, we can control ahead of time, right? Email is an annoying one that we can control. Alerts that come in on our phone as we're doing stuff, that we can control. Text messages that come in as well, that we can control too. And the fun ones that we can control. The internet being a prime example of this, and social media that came up as well in the chat. Distractions blockers are one of the best things that you can download on your computer. My go-to one is called Freedom. The website is called freedom.to, not affiliated with them in any way. There's a lot of different options for it. And this disables all of these things. It's actually quite liberating because you can focus on what matters. But dealing with these ahead of time, one of the best strategies for overcoming this distraction and, frankly, stress, right? Most of what we see as a distraction is really just a source of dopamine. So it's a source of stimulation for our mind that we can engage with to get another hit of that neurochemical. It's addictive. But just because something is stimulating does not mean that it makes us happy. The news is a prime example of this, which I'll get to in a second. But a few rapid fire strategies for you that can help you tame distraction and keep that anxiety scrolling to a minimum at the same time. Number 1, keep a tally of how often you check for new messages. You might be shocked at how often you check for new messages, or just keep a tally of how often you pick up your phone throughout the day, right? Put it on do not disturb mode and notice how many checks that you do. The average knowledge worker checks her or his email 88 times over the course of a day. That's a lot of interruptions. And we pick our phone up even more than that. But we have a lot of stuff coming in, right? We have a lot of things that we need to respond to, things we need to play traffic cop with, moving people and information and bits around. How do we stay responsive while staying focused? One of my favorite strategies for that, and keep in mind, take the advice that works for you, leave the rest. Everybody's different, but I know 1 or 2 of these strategies will work in your case. Message sprints. Set a timer for 10, for 15 minutes. And in that time, blow through as much email and messages and direct messages and every inbox you have, messages that you possibly humanly can. And when the timer goes off, as Gordon Ramsay would say, shut it down. Tend to what focused work that you have to do. An incredible strategy of staying responsive, but also staying focused. Another strategy. There is a mode on our phone that we can enable, and I highly recommend trying it out, that disables all of the color psychology that different applications use to hijack our attention throughout the day. That mode is called Grayscale Mode. And I don't know if you have the Zoom window so that you can see my video at the same time. I hope you do. Hello. It just turns your phone screen black and white. It's usually buried in the accessibility panel on the phone, but this disables all the color psychology that, say a news website might use, right? News websites definitely crank up the saturation of the images that they display so that they're more stimulating to us, right? Disables all of that. And you can enable it again, the color on your phone when you want to say, order Uber Eats, which is my weakness. Another one, notice how apps make you feel. This is something that we are not connected enough with. I remember Arden and I, we were in the living room a while back, and she had this really glum look on her face. And I asked her what she was doing, and she was on Instagram, which in my eyes is one of the most wholesome, bright, vibrant, wonderful social networks in existence. But remember that lesson, that just because something stimulates you does not mean that it makes you happy. Final one, consume less digital news. This is something, we all have these lessons that we have to learn time and time again. We have the lessons we learn once, then we have the ones that we keep having to relearn. And this is definitely one for me. I subscribe to the physical newspaper because I noticed, especially when the last 2 years, just everything in it hit, I noticed that my own mental health was starting to become affected because every time we tend to the news, we tend to threats. Threats cause anxiety. Anxiety lowers productivity. I think, not that everything is about productivity, but I think everything is about intentionality. Right? Intentionality is one of the most beautiful things that makes us human, but the news can ironically compromise our ability to deal with the very events that we're encountering in the first place. But there are strategies out there for dealing with the news that don't involve burying our head in the sand, so to speak. But I think it is worth highlighting just the effect to which the news can affect our mental health. One study that pops into my mind when I think about this was conducted around the 2013 Boston Marathon bombings. And a group of researchers looked at two groups of people. The first group of people were those who watched 6 or more hours of news coverage about the bombings. And the second group of people were runners in the actual marathon. And what the researchers found, comparing those who watched the news to the runners themselves, was that those who consumed that 6 hours of negative news were more likely to develop PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, than somebody who was in the marathon and personally affected by it. That's crazy. That is just baffling to me. And sure enough, other studies do support this notion. One study that exposed participants to 3 minutes of negative news the very first thing in the morning, just 3 minutes before somebody did their day. They found that participants at the end of the day were 27% less likely to say that they were happy. 3 minutes, right? Swap out the Boston Marathon with any current event. There are definitely strategies to find a better balance. We crave threatening information. because we want to understand what might compromise us. There's enough threatening information out there on social media, on the news, if we tend to it. It's important that we tame it ahead of time. So a few strategies that work well: do focused work before checking the news, right? For those 3 daily tasks, can you block off a bit of time and have the news be kind of a weird treat almost for accomplishing that? It's like, I don't know what the equivalent is, because the news is not necessarily a treat all of the time, but it is a consequence of following through with something that moves you forward, so you feel good before you check it. Another one, schedule news time, right? That can compartmentalize it. One of my favorite daily rituals is reading the papers every morning. I get the Kingston Whig Standard, because we're in Kingston these days, and the Globe and Mail, and don't consume any digital news. It costs a bit of money every month, but I find that it essentially allows me to buy back a lot of my mental health while staying informed and staying analytical and not immersed in issues that don't affect my life directly or the communities that I'm in. Another one, limit the number of daily news checks, right? We can limit the frequency. What would it look like? How much better would you feel if you check the news only twice in a given day, right? Could that be a challenge for tomorrow? Would it make you more resourceful? Would it make you happier? I know the answer for me, and it might be the same for you as well. So bunch of different strategies for taming distraction ahead of time that lead us into, everybody, the breakout activity. So everybody has had 45 minutes to make sure they're presentable over Zoom, I hope. And so that breakout activity, simple question, will give you 3 or 4 minutes. Come up with a few fun and creative ways, in addition to the ones we've talked about so far, the ones that I've shared, to tame distractions and interruptions ahead of time. Welcome back. Welcome back. We can start sharing some of the ideas in the. Tristan, should I take the risk of opening the chat window with all these other windows on screen?
If you would like to. I'll be here too. I can help work out the answers as well.
Yeah. So for those joining back, if you have ideas that you arrived at with the group in that time pressure situation, sharing, coming up with creative ways of taming distraction, share them in the chat. We can go through them. Dwayne, hey, device separation, having one device for work, another for personal and social media. That is a fantastic one. I have an iPad that I bought that is my distractions device. And so on that iPad, that is my social media machine. That is my email machine. That is my all of that stuff machine. And it's a wonderful way of compartmentalizing all of that distraction into one place. And when that iPad is somewhere else in another room, for an example, oh baby, it's time to focus. Linda, I turn all media off in order to focus on reading to understand. Yes, it's fascinating, the external environments that we have. I'm assuming in terms of media, you're talking about music and TV and all that kind of stuff. It's fascinating, the relationship that these things can have over our attention. With music, in fact, that's an interesting relationship between that. Yeah, Valentina, music helps me focus. There are actually attributes, the research shows, of certain pieces of music that lead us to be more conducive to focus. And that is something that's whenever something is simple and whether it's familiar. Those two attributes, when something's simple and familiar, that is a sign that something will be conducive to focus. I love music as well. Chill electronic. Lo-fi hip hop is one of my favorite go-tos. I'm also a fan of just listening to Taylor Swift songs on repeat one, because that's how I roll. All right. Any other ideas come up during that breakout? Because I want to make sure I cover the last module, which might push us over a tiny bit, but good stuff. I'm gonna roll right in, and if we go over a little bit, I hope you can stick around just a few minutes. But I'll see this as a personal challenge to try to get through this last little module by the top of the hour. Okay, there are 3 things that matter with our productivity. Time management matters, but there are 2 other ingredients that matter too. We've talked about attention. We're distracted quite a bit, but energy matters as well. And that's what we're going to zero in on now. One experiment, it's highly subjective, but just as valuable, was one in which I charted my peak energy times of day. Our energy per hour is not consistent, and neither is our productivity per hour too, right? Energy is the fuel that we burn in order to be productive. But here's the fascinating thing that I found in measuring my energy fluctuations for 1 month. I found, this is how I rolled, that there were consistent times of the day when I had more energy than in any other time, specifically here and here. I have started to affectionately think of our peak energy times of day as our biological prime time. This is when we're wired to perform. This is when we bring more of ourselves to whatever we happen to be doing. Then we have, though, we got these low points of the day. Here's the fascinating thing. When our energy is the highest, we're the most productive. But when our energy is the lowest, we're the most creative, right? It's by understanding our rhythms, by calculating out when our biological prime time is, that we can work around when our energy peaks and when it dips, so that we can become not just more productive by surfing the highs, but also more creative by enjoying and resting and doing creative work during the lows. So luckily, you don't have to do some weird experiment where you chart your energy levels for a month. I'm going to work through a little calculation, full credit of Till Ronenberg, who is perhaps the world's foremost chronobiologist, to help you calculate your own biological prime time right now. So grab your notepad. I will give you a second to do so, and we will jump in. Nothing more motivating than a deadline. All right. So begin by thinking about a day off, like the weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, the weekend. How long do you sleep for ideally? Write that number down. So in my example, 8 hours. Remember, you wake up rested and you have enough energy just to sleep naturally. What is your total length of sleep? Now, divide that number by 2. I'll give you a second for that complex calculation. Now, here's the thing. Daydream a little bit. You have no commitments, no obligations. You're on a 1-month work holiday on a deserted island. How long? What time do you go to bed at on that free day? You can go to bed whenever the heck you want. What is your ideal bedtime to map with your energy? Write that number down. Now, I'll give you just a couple more seconds there. Now add those previous 2 numbers. So in the example here, at the risk of anchoring your answer in one way or another, I would add 4 hours to 11:30 to get 3:30 a.m. You can post this after, by the way, or feel free to take a screenshot if you'd like. So you should now have some end result. Plot that time on this graph. If you're an early bird, before 3:30, if your time is before 3:30, you're a middle bird between 3:30 and 5:30. And if your time is after 5:30, you are a night owl, just like yours truly. And these are your best times of the day. Your biological prime time, if you're an early bird, is of course, the early morning. But if you want to do creative work, the best time for that is the late afternoon or early evening. If you're somewhere in the middle, early to mid-morning is your biological prime time. Late afternoon and early evening is your creative time to do your creative tasks. If you're a night owl, late afternoon and evening is your biological prime time, of course, as you might expect, but the morning is when to do creative work. Bunch of strategies for this. Rapid fire, of course, because we are on deadline. Book yourself during this biological prime time. People book us constantly. People are booking us for class. They're booking us for meetings. They're calling us. They want advice. We need to book ourselves more often. Block these times out if you can in your calendar. That is when to work on your most productive tasks, right? Work on your most important tasks during these hours. Anticipate obstacles that might arise ahead of time. One of the best things that we can do for our productivity in general is to anticipate obstacles that might get in the way of what we intend to accomplish. Mind the times of those whom you work and study alongside. If somebody's a night owl and you want them to do some focused work, maybe give them a bit of time one evening that might be worth accounting for. If you find that your creative time is in the morning, delay that first cup of coffee so that you can surf that energy low and do more creative work. Your mind is less inhibited when your energy is lower, right? Do creative work during that prime time or recharge intelligently, right? This is the ideal time to recharge, not just do creative work. So those are the 3 strategies. Oh, I'm so happy I fit that in basically under the wire. Thank you for being whatever the opposite of patient is and in that biological prime time activity. And that's the 3rd strategy that I have to share with you. You know, these 3 ideas, very simple strategies for working with greater intention in 2022. Defining those 3 priorities every day, every week in general, right? Taming the distractions that are addictive, but are also usually sources of chronic stress. Chronic stress leads to burnout, leads to exhaustion, leads to cynicism, leads us to become a bit less productive and accomplish fewer of our intentions. And the final one, understanding your daily rhythms, when your energy peaks, when it dips, working around those accordingly. We can all use these strategies to become not just more productive, but also more intentional. And if you do everything well, those might just be the same thing. So thank you so much for having me, for sticking around to the end, or for watching the recording if you're watching this later. And thank you, Tristan, for all your help today as well.
Thank you. I know we're at the end of the hour. So before we get into the questions, I just want to say a big thank you to you, Chris, for this informative and wonderful workshop. I know I learned quite a bit myself, and I'm looking forward to putting this new knowledge into action. I knew I was an early bird, but I just thought that was a lot of coffee that I was drinking. So it's good to learn that as well. And thank you also to everyone who joined us this afternoon. I know like I said, we're at the end. So we will take a few questions if that's all right with you, Chris. But for those of you that do have to leave, thank you for joining us. It was really wonderful to see you all virtually. I did get a question right off the bat, Chris, about the last chart that you showed, and if it would be possible to show the chart again.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
We had a few individuals asking about that.
That one, right?
Yes, I believe
Cool.
it was that one. It was the last few that you saw.
Doing the last, and the one before. So I will display this one for a little bit. You can take screenshots if you want. I think they show up in Zoom. So yeah, the idea behind this chart is if your time is before 3:30 or an early bird, and you can see kind of a normal distribution curve, can't you? So most of us kind of fall in that middle zone. Fewer of us are night out. You said you're an early bird, Tristan?
Yeah, for some reason, I don't know how that happened. I'm not someone who loves to get up in the morning, but I guess when I get up, I can go. So
yeah.
Wonderful. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put it into the chat.
Yeah, I'm happy to stick around, however, until everybody leaves, if you guys want.
I have a question.
Yeah. Hey, Rosa.
Hi. Thanks for the talk.
Yeah.
It was very informative for me. So I noticed that I am in the group of the people that they are night owl, and I knew that, like, I've been like that from when I was like 17, 18. It worked for me so far, like before I joined my partner and living in this under the same roof.
What are you? You're an early bird, night owl, somewhere in the middle?
I am night owl. I'm
night owl. Oh, nice.
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. My brain just worked perfect from evening, right? And
yeah.
I can be awake whole night until morning if I'm working and get a good result. So the schedule for my sleeping, working, everything is different from my boyfriend.
Yeah.
He sleep at 12 precise, almost even earlier. I hardly can sleep at 2. So there's a lot of changes I have to make. And now I have this problem. In the morning, I want to wake up because it doesn't feel right. He's like, because I can work anytime I want, but he has to be early, right? So because of this, I feel like I have to be awake and it doesn't feel right. I'm sleeping, he's working. And because of that, I'm not on my best when I start working, and I don't know what to do with that. Is there anything like to be done to change this biological? I know that eventually, but I think it's going to be a very long process, right?
Yeah, it's possible through artificial ways of adjusting the biological prime time, especially if you're a night owl. And I'm personally this way every day, where I don't like waking up early. My ideal wake up time would be like 8 or like 9, you know, like pretty late. And luckily, somebody self-employed, I have a bit more leeway over the schedule, but there are kind of these artificial means through which we can adjust these times of the day. Having a caffeine ritual first thing in the morning is a helpful strategy. I don't like caffeinating to crazy levels, but I find that so in 2 days I have a speaking engagement at 5 a.m. because it's for a company in India, and I'm like the last time slot of their whole thing. And I asked for it, and I even like pre-recorded my thing, and I can show up late and it's still at 5 a.m. But through artificial means, it's possible to kind of dampen that that rhythm to an artificial level, but still in a level that we can perform really well at and experience more meaning out of our relationships, of course, with the people that we live with. So caffeine is one way. Meditation is actually another way of accommodating for lower time. It allows us to, just step back from our energy rhythms and not be influenced by them so much, so we can power through the lower points. But also one other area is light therapy is a wonderful strategy. Doing light therapy first thing in the morning through a happy light, through a seasonal affect light, do kind of mind the warnings for those lights, because it can lead to mania in terms of people who have bipolar disorder and other disorders such as that. So do mind those types of things. But light therapy and also sleep hygiene is another thing that's worth tracking. There is a great app called Sleep Cycle, where you can track your sleep quality each and every night, so that you get as close to 100% as you can. And when you go to sleep, you can track variables such as, did I have a coffee today? Did I have caffeine? Did I have alcohol? You can have all these things that might influence your sleep to really zero in on what gives you the best quality of sleep every night. So that's another thing, sometimes focusing on sleep hygiene after getting to a ritual where you wake up at a time that is most meaningful is a helpful strategy. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Great. Does anyone else have a question at all they'd like to ask Chris?
Hopefully I've displayed the slides for. I'll put this one up for a little bit, and then everybody will be stuck with my dumb face on the screen instead of the slides.
So I did have a question come in to me directly.
Yeah.
About a recommendation. What would you recommend to someone as the first thing to do to take control of distraction from their phone? Like the first thing that you would recommend that the very first thing.
Yeah. One of the biggest challenges is notifications. So if we're not always reminded that a world of distraction awaits us at our fingertips, we're less likely to fall into that black hole of distraction. Of course, I'm referring to the phone. And each notification that we receive is usually a reminder that this digital world exists in the first place. And each distraction is kind of a gateway into future distraction, because not only are those other distractions presented to us, but dopamine begets dopamine. That's one of the things that the research shows. We want to stay at a very high level of stimulation once we begin engaging with dopaminergic activity. And so we check social media, we get a hit, then we think, oh, that felt pretty good. What am I going to do now? What app am I going to bounce to now? And then we have kind of the stable of applications that we tend to regularly in sort of a dopamine-fueled feedback loop, if you will. And so one of the best ways of overcoming that and lowering our overall height of stimulation throughout the day, because we're engaging with these things less often, is by combing through all the notification settings on your phone and disable any alert that trips you up as you work, as you live your life, that reminds you that this distraction rectangle exists in your pocket. One of the best things that for my own habits and sense of mental health and well-being that I've done is disable any vibrations from the device. And this was a challenge at first because it's not constantly, we become kind of dependent on the device for these dopamine hits. But that was, that can allow us to make a good amount of progress in this pursuit of, honestly, like distraction matters, of course, but it's meaning matters too. And we can get so much more meaning out of our experiences when we don't tend to this devices often. I now see everybody. Hello, everybody.
Wonderful. So before we wrap up, I'll leave it to anyone still here. If they have any other questions they'd like to put in the chat, you're more than welcome to.
If not, it was nice to be here.
Yes, I think that is it. Well, thank you again, Chris, and thank you to everyone for joining. This was really interesting, and I know I have a few things that I'm going to try to put into action this week. We'll see how they go. And I hope that everyone was able to get some tidbits of information and knowledge that they'll be able to put to good use in the upcoming months themselves.
Good stuff. Wonderful. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Chris.